Hi, and welcome to the Tattoo Teacher podcast, where we get to know the person behind the professional, going below the surface of what we see. Join with me as I talk with some incredible individuals from around Australia and the globe. My guest this episode is Matthew Esterman, the co-author of The Next Word, AI and Teachers. He wrote this book with Dr. Nick Jackson. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Matthew as much as I did. Well, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good ever what time of day it happens to be that you're listening to the Tattoo Teacher podcast. My guest today is Matt Esterman. Now, Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me. It's awesome.
It's great that we can finally catch up on something more than a message, that we can actually meet each other face to face as such.
Absolutely. I think that's a deception really of all the messaging, right? Is I remember I was chatting to Cam Patterson at an event a couple of months ago now, and he reminded me that we hadn't actually seen each other face to face for 4 years. And I just couldn't believe it, because Cam is one of those people that, you have in that close circle of people, but we'd talk through message for months and clearly years. And it stunned me. I'm rarely stunned, but that stunned me. So it's sort of deceptive, isn't it? How close we feel through those things.
Yeah, which is a great part of technology. I mean, the fact that I'm sitting here up in the sunny Gold Coast, and you're down in what I last saw was pretty terrible weathered Sydney.
Oh, it was lovely today. Yeah, don't worry about that. It was all good.
Ah, it's back on again. Well, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. And but that's the great thing about tech. And I've chatted with just people in. I spoke with Darren Coxon when he was in Bahrain the first time. Alex Gray over in the UAE. Spoken to people in England, in America, and it's just all starts out with messaging, but it's so great. And I think part of the great thing about technology now is that we can get this human connection eventually.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think that's the thing, right? Is if people keep their heads and say, look, messaging isn't the same as being face to face, but for some people that's their access point to communication too, right? Then if we're all sort of, I don't know, just managing our expectations, then no one gets disappointed. And then when you do get to catch up face to face, is that if that's your bag, like I love hanging out with people face to face, then it's a wonderful experience. But to be able to keep connected in between is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, now look, we're already off and running on the start of tech and things like that. But for the people who don't know you and haven't, we've got the next word sitting up there, and we'll get to that. But who is Matt Esterman? How would you introduce yourself at a cocktail party, for instance?
Well, look, you said cocktail party, because usually I'd say, I'm a history teacher by training, but at a cocktail party, I probably wouldn't reveal that for a little while, because then you start getting questions about what school should I send my kid to, and what do report comments mean. So, look, I am a trained history teacher. So I've been in schools for over 15 years. I even worked in schools while I was at uni as well. So I've sort of been school based most of my career. I'm a father of two kids, and that's been a spin on life as well. I'm a teacher who's been through COVID as well in school, so that's influenced who I am and how I work. I've done some further study. I like being a lifelong learner, I suppose. Based in Australia, but love traveling as well. So yeah, sort of, I don't know. I guess I'm a curious person. I'm just interested in people and circumstance, and being a history teacher, I guess the story of things. And that story doesn't necessarily have to have an ending. So I guess, yeah, there's a few features of Matt Esterman there.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, an educator, a historian, a father, a traveller, and I want to be more traveller. I think I'm the same. I love travelling, but just at this point in time, not doing so much. But that's okay. That's okay.
Hmm.
Now, you mentioned you've been in education for, or as a teacher for about 15 years, a little over 15 years, and you were in schools prior to that while studying. So, what is your why? How did education become your passion?
Look, I think it started perhaps not as a passion, but more a connection, really, because my mum's a teacher, a history teacher, as it happens. So she taught for over 40 years. My uncle's a teacher, two aunties are teachers. My wife's a teacher. I've sort of been surrounded by it for a while. And I actually started off at uni doing a pure ancient history and archaeology degree. And then after a semester shifted across to still do history, but with the teaching diploma as it was then attached to it, and joined the education ranks. So I guess I don't know. I've sort of always enjoyed reading and communication, and and learning about people and places. Some fictional and some real. So I've always been like a humanities person. So for year 12, I did all humanities. I didn't do any science or maths for year 12, which was kind of odd in New South Wales, or it has been
Very,
odd
yeah.
in the past. But yeah, so yeah, and I guess I enjoy creating things as well. So I've always sort of enjoyed coming up with new ideas for, I don't know, assessment tasks and teaching programs and units of work and excursions and that sort of stuff from a teaching point of view. But then also, yeah, a bit of writing and professional learning as well. Like very quickly, I got involved in professional learning and professional networks, and with Nick, my co-author, and with Cam Patterson, who I mentioned earlier, and a bunch of other wonderful educators. We started off Teach Meets in Australia, and that really, that sort of, I'd been in classrooms for a few years by that stage, but that really affirmed my why, which was about all of us being learners. And I guess that's what I've carried since then as well, because it's, I've taught mainly history, of course, but I've taught a bit of English and a bit of geo and a couple of other subjects along the way. And I've never not found it interesting, like I don't demand and stamp my feet and say I must only have history classes. I've always found that, and then other opportunities to be an e-learning coordinator, and most recently director of innovation and partnerships at OLMC. Always a challenge, and going sort of, I don't know, thinking in different ways and seeing what's possible, even if it's not, but seeing if it's possible, and then coming back and working out what is. So yeah, I guess it's curiosity maybe, or I don't know, but I just love working with people who are interested enough to go beyond just what we're kind of told or expected to do. So there's a quote from I love Terry Pratchett. He's my favorite author, and passed away not so recently now, but really wonderful sci-fi fantasy author, and makes fun of absolutely everything. And one of his characters says, I want to hire apprentices because I don't want to meet or work with people who know the limits of the possible. And I guess that's something I've always tried to do, is just to say, well, actually, school's kind of manufactured. Like everything we do is confected in schools. Like it might be based on research and it might be based on really great experience and knowledge, but it's all constructed. So why don't we make it as engaging and interesting as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've hit so many things there that you lifelong learning is the key thing. And I'll throw another terminology out there, which is actually side by side, hand in hand, is the growth mindset. Like, you are always, by the sounds of it, you're always willing to try something new, to broaden your horizons, and to not just go with the status quo. There's some things, obviously, that in education we have to sort of toe that line, but where
Hmm.
you can, you are going, well, how far can we actually push this to make it actually exciting, innovative, and that the students will get an experience from.
And that's the thing. If it's about improving, refining, expanding the student experience, then it's kind of worth investigating. If what we do just works and we know that it works, and you can, there are some great teaching routines and teaching structures and environments like classroom design environments and things like that just work, either through research that shows it or through your own experience or both. But there are so many things that, like I said, that we design in a particular way. But of course, every new class that we experience, every new student we teach is a new student. You never teach the same student twice. You never cross the same river twice, kind of idea. But to stay sane as a system, we have to have structures and repeatable routines. Otherwise, you just would never be able to achieve anything, I suppose. So there's innovation with a sensible core, I suppose, but a curious core as well. And if you lose one, you can't really get the full experience of the other, if that makes sense. So you always need some rules to play by, but I don't mind breaking them or bending them along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, you see that in life with just about everything. We all follow rules, but sometimes we need to. Well, I do anyway. I'll put it there. I'll put it out there. I know that I break rules. I challenge rules. I push boundaries, because it's for me. It's like, well, why do I have to do it that way? Why can't we do it this way? Why can't I bring my lens and my experience into this equation? And some people go, well, because you can't, because that's not the way we do it. And others go, oh, okay, hey, let's try it and see how it goes.
Yeah, and look, I think there's a couple of things there. Like one of them being the irony of being hired to a position because of your CV and because of your experiences, the way you answered the questions in the interview, the way you might have done a demonstration lesson, the posts you're putting on social media. And then when you arrive, maybe told, no, actually, this is not how we do things here. So there's an irony there in that shift and dynamic. But then also that phrase, that's not how we do things here, is like red rag to a bull for me, because I simply ask why. Because there are some things that are really validly not done because of the school values, or because of the system values, or because there are some really valid reasons why it might be harmful, or it might be too risky to try a particular thing. And there are, of course, there's all compliance and legislation sitting in the back for the really serious stuff. But even at the front end, there's there are some genuine things to say, look, we've tried that a couple of years ago and it really didn't work. So if you want to try it again, you have to know that that's the case and try something slightly different. That corporate knowledge is really important. But I guess that's, like I say, if it's that blunt, that's not how we do things here, that thinking is a red rag to a bull for me. Is in the schools are so dynamic already. They're so changeable and evolving and pulsing with energy. Already you wonder, are people doing it because they need to stay sane, like I mentioned before? Like, is it because they're tapped out, like they can't fit anything more onto their cognitive load? Cool. Okay, you can talk through that stuff and you can work through that stuff. Is it because there's no money? That's I mean, there might be just some
Yeah,
realities like that, right?
yeah,
But quite often I've tried to work on a bit of a startup mentality of, okay, I have zero budget. What can I achieve with that? Or it might be my own time that you invest. And a lot of teachers do that. The number of teachers that I've worked with who are flogging it every week to do all the compulsory stuff, all the stuff they need to do, and they do it well. And then they step up again and again to run a drone club or run an entrepreneurship group or take kids on an excursion or sit down and rethink an assessment task on after hours or whatever it happens to be. It's extraordinary what sort of creativity and effort and energy teachers can bring to situations.
yeah. And it's when they have that. I mean, you mentioned drone club and entrepreneurship and certain excursions, and that's where they can bring their passion in, and that's when the students see the person behind the teacher, and then they engage, and there's that, and then the relationship is starting to build, and then it's the possibilities are almost limitless once a teacher has made that connection.
And look, it's really funny. It's funny that you say it in that way. Like you see almost the real teacher in those sort of co-curricular or extracurricular circumstances. Why are we seeing that in class? I think we do. Like a lot of the time, you do see it, right? And I know you weren't saying that, but I agree that is the persona we take on in the classroom sometimes, or often perhaps, is this capital A academic or performing high quality teacher type or archetype. in the classroom because there's a certain professional mentality in that space, and you want to maintain that. But you can kind of allow yourself to open up a little bit if you're their debating coach or if you're their footy coach or something else. Even though you apply the professional standards there, it's a different sort of environment. And I wonder sometimes whether that's sustainable in a way, and if also it's sustainable in terms of the students seeing you in those environments and saying, "Oh, far out, they're really hard, and they're really onto me in class, and they're onto me on the footy field as well, but it's in a different way." And I wonder what that shift in relationship sort of looks like, if that's one of the key indicators of impact. It's just a fascinating dynamic to think that we're different people and we can open up more in different in circumstances outside of the core experience of education, which is the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think you've got that sounds like a PhD thesis for someone who's listening.
They're
Not
welcome
for
to
me,
it.
though. Not for me. Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and look, I think you're right. I think for probably for the younger students, it probably would be quite confusing. I think as the older they get, the older students can probably rationalize it out and go, okay, yeah, well, in class we've got to do this, but we're in a different environment. I mean, for me personally, who I am in the classroom is pretty much who I am outside of the classroom. But again, we go as educators, as you know, our curriculums are getting more and more packed, and so we've just got to punch through all this work, and so we almost don't have time to build those relationships in the classroom.
And look, I think that's true. That despite efforts in New South Wales, at least, to scale back in some curriculum areas, some of the syllabuses that are designed and are going to be implemented theoretically have less content in them. What I think, though, is that, and I wonder if you agree, is that quantum of work around every student that a teacher now has to address in terms of wellbeing support, in terms of other types of support, like what a teacher means per student, is vastly more complex than what it meant even when I started teaching, I think, when the teaching standards were just starting to come in New South Wales and across Australia. And that alone highlighted the breadth of professional areas and then descriptors within those areas that teachers had to at least reach a minimum capability in. But then there's all that other work around how do you build relationships in a professional way? How do you deal with the multitude of different random environmental and people factors that might cross your experience in a day? Like, there aren't many jobs around the world where you're expected to deliver a high quality presentation 5 or 6 times a day to multiple clients and target it individually at the clients in the room, and also diagnose where they're at and where they need support, and also then do supervision of human beings in amongst that, and also maybe clean up vomit because someone's done that in the hallway, and you know what I mean, like, and then go and do bus duty.
Absolutely.
It's
And
highly
mate, if you're
complex.
lucky, get a cold cup of tea in there somewhere.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's,
Yeah,
some of that
I
has
think
always been
you're right.
true and will always be true. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, I think as teachers, we know that we're going to be busy. We know that we're going to be inconvenienced. And look, I would say 99.9% of teachers are very happy with that. And that's part of the job, because we're there. We want to help these young men and women become the next leaders in whatever field that may be, from what society may say, is the lowest rank to the highest office, to the most menial task, to the what people might see as the most important, whatever that is. But that's our job as educators, to give these young men and women the tools, the skills, the encouragement to take hold of their opportunities and be successful in what they're passionate to do.
For sure. And I think there's a couple of things there too, in terms of, valuing teachers and teachers valuing themselves, and certainly other members of the school community valuing teachers and each other as well, because support staff, of course, parents, school leaders, and the students themselves all have a role to play in that journey. And I think most teachers are very fine to keep slogging it out, and doing the big hours that teachers do every week, because they see the value in it, and hopefully they're recognised for the value of that. Because that's, teachers really don't expect, we're not actually expecting our salaries to double at any particular point, even though there's
It'd
plenty of
be
people who
nice,
say
but we're not expecting it.
it'd be nice, but we're not expecting it. And any other sort of big dramatic changes, but a lot of teachers just need that acknowledgement and that affirmation that they are doing a great job. That, being called out when we're not doing a great job, and having standards applied consistently and fairly and all that sort of stuff. But there's that. And then, I guess it is that why are we there, and do we have a shared sense of the mission of why we're there at that school? Because the mission is different in different schools, right? But I think that one of the similarities between most schools would be, and being part of the Schools Plus fellowship program, by the way, has been hugely eye-opening for me, in terms of the different experiences across Australia at different schools of all levels, including early childhood and higher ed. But one of the similarities is we're all aiming to give kids choices at the end of school, or even before the end of school. If they've got choices, then that's a form of success. If they have no choices, and there's kind of some sort of societal channel that they're being pushed into because they don't have choice, then that's a failure, I think. But there are teachers all across the country and the world in all sorts of circumstances just trying to get their students choices, when they do choose to graduate.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, and we are so blessed to be in a country like Australia, because the more conversation I'm having, the more I'm realizing that whilst we have our, grievances, complaints, issues, whatever they may be, when you compare to some other nations, we are well ahead in so many areas. So it's always good to take that step back and get that broad view to go, you know what, we're doing all right. We've got choices. I can move to this, and I can change my subject area, and I can go retrain and reskill and go and study, and I've got all these options that I want to make sure that the students have access to as well. So you touched on standards, and you talked about I think in New South Wales it's NESA. Is that the group now?
The authority. Yep.
Yeah, the authority. So up here in Queensland, we've got the Queensland College of Teachers.
Yep.
I was in Sydney working at a school just when that body was starting to be formed. I'd been teaching for about 5 years just before it was formed, and the amount of angst towards this body from a lot of teachers, because they're going, why do we need this? We are doing our job well. We have done our job well for the last, for some of them, the last 20 years. Why do we need to pay someone to say we need to meet these outcomes? And it was really interesting. And like I'm up here in Queensland, and we have our governing body that we submit all documents to, and we have to keep up CPD and all those things. And I look back all those years and I go, I can see why there was pushback, but then I can now see with hindsight, actually that's a really good thing, because it did force a lot of teachers who were taking advantage to actually be called into account, and it raised our profession again.
Look, and it really brought us in alignment with a lot of other professions too. I mean, you can't want to be treated as a professional and not have professional standards and professional bodies and professional accountability structures. And so I think it took time, as every change does, and it's dynamic, and it itself changes over time. Like the process for accreditation in New South Wales has changed a couple of times. The expectations change, the standards themselves change in some cases, to at least to what's expected, what you're expected to document and show on a regular basis. But yeah, like most, my sister's a lawyer and she pays a fee to their association and other associations. I mean, I haven't heard many history teachers complain about having to pay a fee to the History Teachers Association of New South Wales, because you know what I mean? Like, it's that, to me, it's that kind of professional, small, relatively small commitment back to your profession and to, I mean, I complained about it as well, of course, and people have the right to ask, what is that 10 odd million dollars doing
Yeah.
each year? There are questions like that, absolutely, which should be asked, and NESA have put out very clear information about what that money is being spent on. And for a long time, it was in particular the auditing and tracking of professional learning in New South Wales, so that you couldn't just be some random person off the street charging teachers money to run professional learning. You had to get approved through NESA to be able to say that you were an accredited provider. So there were things like that where we could, again, it's that raising of the standard of not teaching per se, but of the professional experience, I suppose. And so you could go along to PD and at least have some recourse if you felt that it was terrible quality, that you could go to NESA and say that was terrible quality, and they would at least be able to log that and review the process. That's changed since in the last few months in New South Wales. So there's kind of a murkiness around that at the moment. But again, I think most people are in the game to do the right thing. It's like when I have chats with people about AI, as I did just this afternoon. I kind of assume teachers are ethical beings, because they probably wouldn't be in the game if they weren't. But yeah, there's systems need accountability structures. Like, it's not an odd thing. And again, I don't know if this is just because I'm a history teacher, but you see systems around the world all needing some sort of bureaucracy to keep track of things. And whilst ever governments spend money on stuff, they will want accountability measures. So so long as it's as streamlined as possible, so long as it's as valuable, like I said, that valuing of teachers, if the teachers who are logging their PD, who are tracking their growth, who are meeting standards and documenting ways they're doing that, so long as that process is as streamlined as possible and is valued by both the authority that's making them do it and by the teachers themselves to some degree, then it's as okay as we can make it. And to be honest, like, I do like the idea of an accountable authority being a kind of standard setter for everyone in that jurisdiction. So it doesn't matter what school you're at. When you meet those standards, and you can go to a Catholic school or a public school or an independent school. You can even take it across state borders, as hard as that is. I know people don't hate me. I know how hard it is to transport your quals and that sort of stuff. But at least it gives that baseline at each of those levels of professional expectation.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what it comes down to. That it's being professional, valued as a professional, and bringing all that into the classroom. And speaking of standards and values, and you mentioned about qualifications and streamlining things. I'm gonna if people know you, they know you're very much into technology, as being an integrator of technology at the high school in Parramatta at OLMC, but you've also have dove headfirst into generative AI, and your school has been, the school that you're at has been very supportive, or were very supportive of your endeavours. Your co-author, Dr. Nick Jackson, at Scotch College down in Adelaide. Again, his school very supportive of implementing generative AI, getting the students to use it, training the teachers on the technology that has just exploded. We all know that AI has been around for a long time, but generative AI, November 2022 was sort of when it really blew up. How do you see now? Yeah, because we always talk about equity across schools and across states and things like that. How how do you see this technology? How do we make it equitable um, to the students, but also how do we get the buy-in from teachers? Because I know a lot of teachers are going, no, nah, and a lot of schools are going, we're not having that. How?
Um, yeah. I think the first starting point is to have a really honest conversation and say, you might not want it, but you have it. Because if your students are one of the 94+% of students who have direct access to a smartphone that's internet connected, you've got it and you have to grapple with it. It's like saying no to social media. Yeah, you might block every possible way to get to it on site on school devices, but you're still going to have to deal with the consequences of, a terrible scenario online or something like that. So I think it's almost too much effort to ignore it, these days, because it's just so prolific. In a world where Meta can just decide to roll out AI into all of its apps, and it just appears in the
I
update,
know that was just.
and you
I opened my WhatsApp and it was there. I opened Instagram, it was there. So
Yep. And you have, at some point in the past, it might have been several years ago, you clicked accept, right? And so all of those rollouts will come, whether you agree right now or not. And so if that's the case, and unless governments, as I'm pretty sure Twitter, X as it is now, is blocked in Brazil thanks to its fiddling with election messaging and communications and things like that, right? Unless a government or
yep,
judge in that case is willing to push an entire national ban on something, then we've got to deal with it in schools. And we are, as Nick and I talk about in the book, it's a different world before and after chat. So there's like the BC, the before chat era, and the after chat era. And I do think deeply about that, using those terms, being a history teacher. But
yeah,
we
absolutely.
really, it really was one of those threshold moments for society where suddenly essentially everybody, has access to these tools. So in terms of an equity question, I think it could be uh, uh, it could improve a level playing field as much as that's practically possible. I think in a world where a student at the lowest SES school in Australia can either at school or at home pick up a device and chat with those bots, just like the kid at the wealthiest school in Australia can also do that process. Yes, there are paid versions which have massive capabilities, but those things are filtering down into the free versions as well. And there are plenty of apps that are wrappers around those tools as well, which are often free. And I think if that's the case, it's a pretty good situation for us to leverage, and it therefore is up to us to leverage it. So I'm not sure it's a worthwhile path to ignore it. I don't. So in our case at OMC, we weren't sort of necessarily looking to be seen as sort of early adopters, trailblazers, anything like that. I just really had students and staff in mind, and certainly 94+% of our students have mobile phones for themselves. We're a high school, so most teenagers do have phones in metropolitan areas. So that was a factor for us. We were, of course, concerned about assessment integrity. We were concerned about communications. We were concerned about learning, and all the things that we're still talking about, and we will continue to talk about and have to deal with, and be dynamic in how we respond to it. But what I tried to do is lower the temperature quite a bit and say, okay, well, say from a policy point of view, I co-wrote an AI policy with ChatGPT and was very open and transparent about that with my colleagues. But I also said, look, I really don't want to add another policy at all. But if we need one, then I want it to be a one-pager or thereabouts, and I want it to be a policy that's a stance rather than a hard-nosed policy, because we don't know what the tech's going to do in the next couple of years or the next couple of months. So we can't name platforms, we can't even name technologies. Like who knew, GPT 4.0 would come out within months of GPT 4 and all that sort of stuff. So, take it away from all that. And also, so we didn't want to create something really cumbersome for ourselves to manage, but then also, and me, by the way, because I was responsible for that policy. So I didn't want to make it cumbersome for myself. But also, we've got an assessment policy. We've got codes of conduct. We've got IT acceptable use policies. We've got enrollment policies. We had about 8 policies that already covered the behaviours that may come from the use of that particular technology. So in terms of academic integrity, our assessment policy very clearly stated, if you hand in work that is not yours or substantially yours, here are the consequences. Doesn't mention technology, and it doesn't really care because it could be a parent that had a large role in your project, or it could be an older sibling who we gave the same assessment task to a couple of years ago, and she just said, "Well, why don't you use mine as an example?" And shame on us for not updating our assessment policy if that was the case. Luckily, that never happened, so we did well on that front. And so there are those. What about tutors? What about friends? What about sample essays online? What about students from other schools where they're all in study buddy chats on WhatsApp and wherever else already? So if our concern is actually seeing the students' work as a reflection of their growth and progress, that's what we should be concerned about, not whether it's through technology or not. So it's a much more difficult conversation than do we ban AI? Personally, I think it's like trying to ban the weather. You just sure try, but you can't. But you can have a wet weather policy that says in these circumstances, here's what we do.
Yeah.
So I think that's where schools kind of get stuck a little bit in terms of trying to develop a policy that, it's unenforceable in some cases or just a bit of a distraction to other things. So there's some really positive things you can do though as well.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And like what I love to hear is your excitement about the possibilities of this new tool. Forget its name, who was who what brand it might be, etc., etc. But how can it be leveraged into the student's educational experience? And I mean, I know that the many conversations, and I'm sure you've had many more than I, is, oh, we should ban it. Oh, what about plagiarism? Oh, what about this? And it's focusing on all the negatives, and I'm trying to explain and espouse the positive of what it can do. And they go, well, what do you mean? What positives? How can that help me as a teacher? And I've gone, okay, so we've got a diverse range of students in our class. We know that we could have reading levels from, a year 12 class, we could have reading levels from an 18-year-old down to a 14-year-old, but they still have to sit the same assessment. I said,
Yep.
so you take your sample piece, put it into whatever platform you decide to use, and say, please rewrite this so that a 14-year-old can understand. And they go, you can do that? And I'm going, yes, there you go. And it just, all of a sudden you see them, and then the questions start coming. Also, can I do this? And can I do that? And it's just like, yes, that's why we don't want to ban it. That's why we want to get people using it. So,
Yep. And I think I don't see any difference to that than spinning around in the staff room and asking a colleague, or grabbing a book off the shelf, like one of those sort of, differentiation handbooks or something, perhaps. Yes, there are ethical issues of using AI, absolutely. But we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I mean, I drive an unethical car and wear unethical clothes and live in an unethical house. And I'm not being facetious. These are all things that we grapple with every day. And say my effort in the house is to replace older light globes with more sustainable light globes. I still need light. I'm not going to go by candlelight. So that's the ethical decision I make, is to do a better version of, or make the better choice, I suppose. And again, it's I don't think it's feasible to say don't use things. I do think it's feasible though to have a conversation with students and say there will be some points where I don't want you to use this. There'll be other points where I don't care. You can green light for everything AI. And there are some times where it's a bit amber. And so, if you want a traffic light system, go for it, but don't stop at this whole task is red, amber, or green. It's got to be more nuanced than that, because the students will do it. And they sometimes won't be able to help doing it, because even Google's using AI to finish sentences, to encourage you to keep writing, to encourage you to keep buying stuff, whatever it happens to be. But all of
yeah.
these tools now are built to help you to do those things. So I think it's even in Word and PowerPoint and everything now, with Copilot being able to be deployed within that system and in browsers and everywhere. I think kind of like, okay, I'll give you an example. If we're not okay with this, are we okay with spell check and grammar check? Because if you're okay with spell check and grammar check, then you're okay with students submitting work that is not 100% theirs.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Because they have, and so I know that people kind of bristle at that sometimes, and that's just the first part of the conversation, right? Is that okay? Most people, I think, say, yep, it's totally fine. There are some circumstances where it's not, like there are students who sit exams using computers and they're not allowed to use spell check and grammar check. They just have to type it, or have a writer type it for them, and then they submit whatever was typed. There's no checking or reviewing. But as is true in industries, as is true at university, as is true in senior high school, and all the way through, I would argue that no one cares if you use spell check and grammar check. And if it's not true for any of those other levels of work, society, life, then I think it's a bit rich to ask teachers and students as well to adhere to that, unless you are marking their spelling. If you are marking their spelling, great. That's a red task or a red step in a task for AI. For spell check, which may be AI driven as well. So yeah, I think that's sort of one of those equivalency arguments and discussions we need to have, because like I said, about parents, about tutors, about siblings, if we're okay with all of those influences over learning, and teachers too. I mean, we tell kids where to go and how to get there, and we give them scaffolds and we give them samples. So if we're not okay with AI doing that for them, then we're not, and of course people are going to say, but it's the teacher deciding to. And I say, yeah, but it's also the student is their teacher sometimes too. If you're not available, if the human's not available, they now have an option, whereas they didn't before. And again, equity-wise, that is actually equitable, because the student who goes home to a teacher mum, right, who if I'm grappling with something in an essay structure or whatever, I can get direct help there. Whereas 99% of my mates didn't have a teacher parent. So I've got an advantage, and that's unequal as well. So I think the main point is these platforms do allow students to learn in particular ways, and yes, to submit work and generate work that's not theirs. But that's not a technology question. That's a culture and structure and values question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I know, like you took, direct instruction. I mean, I show, I teach design and I teach visual arts. And so I show my students exactly how to do things. And because they're the steps that need to be complete so that their job will actually be safe, or they'll be able to complete the task properly, or they won't injure themselves. Like, do it this way, because if you don't do it that way, you're going to hurt yourself. So the parallels are phenomenal when you break it down to those types of levels of, this is what it can be used for, this is what it can't be used for, this is when we can use it, this is when we can slightly integrate it, and this is when we or just go whole hog, go for it. But like we said, see the kids, like go whole hog, use it 100%, but show me how you inputted it. So, I get the kids to laser cut things.
Yep.
And if they don't input the right data into the program, laser cut is not going to work. And I'm going to see the flaws in their work. So same with AI. With generative AI, if they put the wrong information in, I'm going to see the flaws in their work, or the flaws in their understanding, I should say.
Well, and that understanding is what we're really getting to, right? And it's saying, okay, well, if they have just fully generated something with AI, sit them down for 5 minutes, ask them 3 questions about that piece of work that they've submitted, and they probably won't be able to answer it. So there are other, in those exceptions to I think the general rule, because I do have a pretty positive view of young people, and that they do want to do well a lot of the time, and they do want to show you their work. They want to show you what they're capable of. But if they have submitted something that's not theirs, despite your warnings and despite your guidance, then you can sit them down and say, great, can you just tell me what this sentence means? Can you just give me another scenario where that might work? And if they've used something and if they've done the work and if they can show you they're working, just like in maths, they should be able to explain the steps to you, or at least their thinking behind it. Um, because that's what we're after, is better thinking and better thinkers.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, speaking of better thinkers and better thinkers, and we're talking about generative AI. Now, you have led a very busy professional life, as your co-author has as well. You know, full on jobs, and then with your the scholarship that you won, you did extensive traveling and uh, networking with the other recipients of the award. Yet you've written a book. What was the drive for you and Nick to write the next word?
So last year in particular, and basically since ChatGPT came out, Nick and I had regular, message chats, or we started having these Sunday night chats, basically asking each other, what the heck just happened in your school, um, and in your social feeds and in your conversations with people, because things were just changing so, not just rapidly, but in multiple different ways. It was all happening all at once, all over the place. And so that it was a way of us making some sense of that experience and checking in with each other, as to, because we were in roles that kind of had AI in their bag, and trying to make some sense about things. And then I can't remember which one of us said it, but I think one of us said, we should really write a book at some stage as well. And so we started, that just sort of planted a seed, and we started thinking about it more deeply. We both started recording conversations, Nick much more diligently than I, recording some of the conversations we were having with people from all around the world. And we realized, there was plenty of substance for a book. But we wanted it to be somewhere in between an academic paper and a blog post, like somewhere in the middle there. So a sort of a professional article in a professional journal kind of level. So something people could pick up, read one chapter of, get some takeaways, literally, because we've got takeaways at the end of each chapter, and then move on with their life for a couple of weeks, and then come back to the book and read the next chapter if they wanted to, or they could sit down, read it cover to cover, and get enough depth that you can get a deeper understanding of this weird world and the technology, but also enough depth in an educational context. So we use examples from law and health and a few other places, as we do in our workshops. But it really was that, to just try and make sense of what we were thinking and share that and other people's stories from around the world.
Yeah, because I remember when it all started happening, and we both. I mean, there's a whole. I mean, LinkedIn. We've got this sort of. It's almost an echo chamber, but
Yeah.
it's I see a lot of people hear echo chamber and they see it as a negative, but I think what I've been exposed to and been involved in has been so positive, because we've all grown, and that's how we met. That's how I met Nick and a range of other people who are also mentioned in your book. And transparency here, I've been quoted twice in the book, so I'll put it out there, and I thank you and Nick for that. And I remember we had this conversation. Nick and I had this conversation. He goes, "Oh, look, do you mind if I record it? I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it. We're just starting to get stuff down." And I'm just like, "Okay, yeah, sure, no problem." Like, it's just having a great professional conversation about. And this was very much in those early stages. It would have been, I'm thinking, probably very, very early 2023.
Mm.
So I've been playing around with it. And now, look, I'd heard about AI. Like, my oldest son is in video game design.
Mm.
So he was talking to me about it well before GPT came out, like, because he was on Mid-Journey Discords and things like that. So he was showing me, and I thought, oh, hey, look, that's fantastic. That's a great thing. And then all of a sudden it started to creep into other areas. And I thought, so the ears pricked up a little bit. I started paying more attention to it. And then when GPT was released to the wider public, I started seeing it. I started experimenting. I thought, this has got some real potential to help with education. And I guess you saw the same sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too, that idea that a few things stacked up, and the timing of GPT came after 30 odd years of widespread internet use, 20 odd years of smartphone-ish technology. I think the iPhone came out in about 2007, about then.
About then. I should know as a design teacher because it's one of the
That's
seminal
right.
moments in design. So.
Let's say 2007. And then social media, the decade after. And then you have this stuff. So you've got all the leveling up and the scaling up on top of one another of all those technologies. And then GPT comes along so we can share it with anyone. We can ask anything. But also, on top of all of that stuff, it doesn't require anything beyond the ability to text. That's it. That's your way in. You need an email address potentially, and you need to be able to text. And by 2022, everyone can text. 2-year-olds can text, which isn't necessarily a good thing. But it just hit the world community at that pretty much perfect moment. So that the AI wasn't a surprise to a lot of researchers, right, or a lot of high tech industry people. And in some industries, like you say, in animation, game design, film design even, and certainly your Amazons and whoever else who have been using algorithms for years to sell us stuff were sort of like, yep, okay, this is the next bit of what we've been doing for ages. But the fact that it was in your hand and all you had to do was text, and you still do, you can speak to it, but if you don't want to speak because you don't want people to hear, you can just text. And I think that and actually it comes back to game design too, where I love the premise of, easy to play and hard to win in game design. And it's the same thing. It's easy to play with ChatGPT. It's easy to play with these technologies. It's hard to get to the really sophisticated technological aspects of AI, and that's why very few people do it. But in terms of if you want to do the vast majority of what a lot of us do on a day-to-day basis in terms of creating documents and communicating with people and coming up with ideas and planning, then these tools can really help. And so I think a lot of people from all sorts of different walks of life realize they could chat. I remember showing my sister at Christmas in 2022. She's a lawyer, contract lawyer, and I just leant over to her on the couch and I said, hey, you might not have seen this thing. What's the most complex legal term that you have to use with clients? And so she found it. I can't even remember what it was. It was super highfalutin, and like that word. She picked it up and I just said, look, type in, please explain this concept to me as if I'm a 5-year-old. And she typed that prompt in and with the word, and she just sat there saying, wow, oh, wow. And she was enjoying the experience. And she was a bit shocked. But that kind of moment where a lawyer and a teacher can sit down, across from someone who works in a bank and whatever else, and just use these tools and show each other and lean across. And it's not social media. It's not trying to outdo one another. It's not about how you look or anything like that. I think it just hit the world at just the right time for everyone to go, oh, this will help me so much. And when productivity is sort of curbing off in some industries and people are wondering about how we deal with the complexities of school and all this sort of stuff, and you start to say, well, we can kind of give you a day, a week back of time, and you'll still fill that stuff up, that time up with other things. But, across all these different industries and professions, radiologists, pathologists, chemists, educators, doctors using it, GPs using, voice AI tools to listen to your conversation and then give you better diagnoses, all that sort of stuff, let alone students in schools coming along and saying, oh, can we use it too? And then all the grown-ups saying no. And so what's the worst thing you can say to a teenager is don't do that. But or my 5-year-old. That whole confluence of factors meant it was one of those really critical moments in history, I think, and where we will still continue to grapple with it. And what's going to happen, I'm sure there's a term for this, but we'll only just get used to that version of things, and then it'll all change again. So I think we just have to surf the wave. We have to stop and breathe and reflect as often as we can, and remember we can't be everything to everyone and do everything. But we can teachers in particular, schools can be really dynamic places. And given these tools, we won't solve the workforce shortages, or we won't solve mental health crises or anything like that necessarily, but far out, this will help us reduce administrative tasks, the lower value tasks, so that we can deal with those higher value circumstances and opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what I found. I mean, I use it pretty much every day. And most of the time, it's not student facing at all. It's not even in the classroom. I use it very sparingly in the classroom, just because I've got to get through other stuff, and there's other stuff I want to teach them. And I use, I do use some of the generative image stuff,
Yep.
just to bring a bit of fun into the classroom, to go, hey, because I mean, the biggest thing that I hear in every design, I can't draw, and there's some great tools now that will take these drawings, and create with the input from the student, with the text input from the student about it needs to be this color, it needs to be this gloss, and whatever it might be, and it creates their image. And then if it doesn't create what they thought they wanted, they can then modify it and it creates it again. So it's taking that you are a creative person, you can express yourself in a creative way. Yes, your pencil might not work the best way, but if you can see what you want with your words, then you'll be able to draw what you want. So, I do things like that. So
That's awesome.
to make it fun. So, speaking of fun, was the book an enjoyable process? Because I mean, I've heard authors, and that they're pulling their hair out, and they need to go away for 6 months, and they're a year late on the published date, and it's a real grind to get it out. So, was it fun creating the book?
Oh, it was a blast. Yeah, the fact that we spent all this time outside of hours on it, and chatting to each other on a Sunday night as a standard thing, and then going off and writing drafts, and it was a really enjoyable process. It was my first time writing something this substantial. So I'd done sort of journal articles and things like that for professional journals and whatever, but the first time I'd written genuinely collaboratively as well. So we had to find our collective voice, which was a great process to go through. One of the original ideas for structure that we had was that Nick would do a third of a chapter, then I'd respond, and then we get AI to respond to that. And we found that it was just too clunky. It didn't flow, and so we had to find a way to talk about us and our and we, whilst also then at points taking on our voice to talk about what Nick's done or what Matt's done as well. So, the reports are that it works, which is lovely. And we had great support from Alicia at Amber Press to get to that point as well. But there was no kind of rhythm, really. It's not something we plan to do sort of 3 hours on a Friday morning or whatever, because not that you can.
Yeah.
But because that's life. But also, it was way more organic than that. And I'd write a chunk, and then Nick would have a look at that and review it, and then he might add to that, or he might say, "No, I love all that stuff. So let's keep it there." But then we might come back to it like a month later and go, "Oh, you know what? I had this, I ran this workshop, or I had this conversation, or whatever," and we tweak things, or we'd do an interview with somebody who sort of, just added a whole new dimension to what we might be talking about. And I've actually got to go back, I reckon, and have a look at some of those early drafts and see how different they are. And I mean, I'd probably be horrified by those first early drafts. But like I say to students, the first draft is the worst one you're going to write. So don't be too hard on yourself. And I guess that was the thing, is we weren't hard on ourselves. We were really open and honest with each other. We questioned, but because we knew each other, we could question with, friendly banter, and that kind of, we had that shared vision of something that was useful for teachers, something that was useful for busy teachers. And so that gave us some guardrails, as to, if I wanted to go off on a tangent about history teachers, Nick, or something like that, Nick might say something along the lines of, "Oh, that's not going to make sense for this group over here." And so I'd have to rethink that. And similarly, I'd throw similar challenges to him. So our minds, or at least my mind, can't speak for Nick, but my mind was certainly on fire most of the time with the hard thinking you have to do, the creative thinking, the way of explaining things, and testing the information with people quite frequently. So I'd have my mum read a chapter or something like that and give some feedback, and bless her, she'd give me a lot of written feedback and felt like I was back in class. But it was really useful, and it was thanks to people like mum and like yourself and like all that. I mean, no book's written by a single person going off for 6 months and writing in a cabin somewhere. It's just not. Like, they've got a publisher who tells them things. They're getting external stimuli from other places. I can't imagine there's any writer who could genuinely say that every single part of it's theirs. And of course, we had a bit of assistance from different AI tools as well. So if you tried to do like a diagram of the writing process, it wouldn't look like one of those spaghetti memes that you see about, how research is intended to be and how it actually is. It's got all these other tech bits kind of plugged into it too. But so we like to say we authored it, but we didn't write the whole thing, because there were so many inputs from other people and yeah, some help assistance from AI as well.
Oh, that's excellent. That's excellent. And I've heard amazing things about Amber Press. They are just so supportive of educators, which is great to hear that they want to get the obviously it needs to have a value and they need to see that it has value, but they just want to get work out there of people like yourself, which is
Yeah,
fantastic.
100%. Yep, yep. And like I said, Alicia and the editors that she got involved and others. I mean, we turned it around pretty quick. I mean, we started formally writing in January, and we got the first draft done by March, I'm pretty sure. And so we were able to edit, and get a final draft through by May, which was kind of useful because that's when I had my little health sojourn for a couple of weeks out of action. And and then by August it was in our hands. It was an amazing experience. Like, I really would, anyone who's got an idea where they do this kind of thing and they want to talk to people about it, and they try it in their school, and maybe they only talk to people in their school about it, but they find that it's resonating with people. It doesn't have to have an impact per se, but that it just resonates with people. Guarantee there's an audience for it. And you don't have to be in the LinkedIn echo chamber or wherever else. You just have to be willing to share, I suppose. And if you're willing to share, then give Amber Press a call, because I'm sure they'd entertain a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll put links to this in the show notes as well for Amber Press, but also for your book, which I haven't read completely yet. First thing I did was quickly went through it to find where I was, because Nick goes, have a look in it,
Absolutely. Yeah,
and
as
so
you should.
I quickly found that, and my wife said, "Yep, okay, what are we going to do with your ego now?" So
And you said, well, I'll just sign this for you. And
absolutely, we have my wife and we have a running joke. Whereas yes, she likes to keep me humble.
great.
But I put together, and look, being a busy teacher, I've read a bit and then I had to put it down. I was distracted by this, and then I was caught up with this, and life, and as you said, life is there, but it has that ability where I can just pick it up and quickly jump in, or I looked at the chapter references and go, okay, hold on, I'm just gonna scan that one super quick, and then pick up a little tip and trick here and there. So I highly recommend it for any educators out there, especially those who are new to generative AI.
Yeah, well, look, thanks. I really, really appreciate it. And we certainly did write it with no prior knowledge required. So that introductory chapter is a bit of a brief about where AI was in the first half of this year. We hope that it still has relevance for another 6 months or 12 months at least. But we feel we've written it for not just for the tech that was, but also for the thinking and the collaboration and the inspiration that will certainly come in the next few years with AI as well.
Oh, most definitely, most definitely. Well, look, Matt, I appreciate your time, and I don't want to take up too much because whilst it's daylight saving is works wonderfully down in when you're talking with people in New South Wales and Victoria, but when you're up in Queensland, apparently the cows get confused and the curtains get faded if we have daylight saving. So
Yep.
that's
I,
there's
I,
something.
I
Some things just don't make sense. I'm a New South Welshman through and through, but I love living in Queensland. So.
Fantastic. Yep, there are ups and downs, right?
Absolutely. So, just before we finish off, I've just got a couple of final questions before I let you go. First one is, what is a challenge that you have for our listeners out there?
A challenge. So, if you're working in a school, I think the challenge is to find an aspect of your role. So, you can go to your job description and look at those bullet points you probably haven't looked at since your interview and pick one and see if you can turn that into a prompt and see what AI can do for you. Like we talked about earlier, can it give you options? Like with the differentiation question, can it give you options on how to do that particular role? Can it help you plan? Can it help you create smart goals for that particular aspect? But try and find one aspect of your role where you could use AI as your assistant to help you speed up, accelerate, improve, embellish, whatever you need to do with that particular aspect.
That's excellent. I actually might try that just for the sake of it. Just well,
Go for it. It's really. Oh, can I also add to that? Once you
yes.
get that goal, or especially if you're using it for SMART goals for an annual planning process, once you've got those original goals that it spits out to you, say, okay, great. Now give me some more radical goals that will really challenge me. And it's really interesting to see what comes back.
Yeah, it's always fun to challenge it and to push the boundaries of these chatbots. I think it's a lot of fun. And yeah, even when you're bored, it's just I'm gonna have a brain relax and you just have fun and see how creative you can be with it. So, but yeah, that's it. I love that I'll pull up my job description and see what GPT or Gemini or whoever you're using expects me to do. So. Now, you mentioned a quote earlier on, right at the beginning of our conversation, but do you have any other quotes? And I mean, I'm assuming being a history teacher, you have a myriad of them, but do you have any quotes that I guess that not that you necessarily live by, but that you hold fast to?
Yeah, there's a couple, I suppose. One is it's attributed to Oscar Wilde, and I'm pretty sure it's him, which is that moonshot quote of aim for the moon because the worst that'll happen is you fall amongst the stars.
Yeah,
Yeah, it may not be Oscar Wilde now that I think about it, but essentially give something a go because the worst that happens is that you'll grow, and that's not a pretty bad thing. Or that's not a very bad thing.
yeah,
Another one is done's better than perfect, the kind of startup mentality where if you're striving for something, I rarely, despite saying the moonshot, my moonshot is never perfection. It's better than what it is, and yeah, done is better than perfect. It's what I say to students all the time around major works and things like that, and I'm sure you have too, Phil.
yeah,
Is you actually do have to get something done and produce
yeah,
something, because you could be striving for perfection for the rest of your life and beyond, but you need to actually get it done. And yeah, whether it's in work or life or whatever, done's better than perfect because you'll find perfection in weird places. Like there'll be a time when you're, I don't know, for me at the moment, it's sort of playing a game, like a board game or something, or I was playing chess with my 5-year-old the other day because she wanted to learn how all the pieces move thanks to a Bluey episode she watched about a year ago now. And that's joy. There's joy and there's perfection in those moments. I don't need perfection in setting my SMART goals for the year.
yeah. Absolutely. One of the things I say quite often and is that I'm perfectly imperfect. So with all the flaws that I have, it's that creates the perfection in some areas. That it is
Mm.
flawed, that it is not quite up to whatever the standard might be, but because you're in it, that's what makes
Mm.
it perfect. So, but I like the good is done is better than perfection. So
I live
that
by it.
that's perfect. I'll have to put that one up. Um, Now, it wouldn't be the Tattoo Teacher podcast if I didn't ask you, Matthew, do you have any tattoos?
No, I don't. I don't. I knew you were going to ask me that question, and I was tempted to go out and do it in preparation, but I wasn't brave enough to to go that far. So sorry. Maybe next time we chat.
Yeah, no, look, it's a big step, and look, most people who get one don't stop there. So
Yeah, right.
it's
Well, we did.
it's one of those.
Yeah, we had. I was just going to say we had a colleague who used to go to Japan quite regularly to go to a tattoo artist in, it wasn't Tokyo, I can't remember which city it was, and work with this like world leading tattoo artist to keep adding to his body artistry. It was just incredible. So I've got so much time and respect for people who put that much energy and creativity and yeah, and effort and themselves into that process. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, for me, it's a creative outlet. Every single piece of ink has meaning. There's none. There's no. There was no late night brain snaps that have landed up in my skin. There.
Oh, look,
they're
well, we
all
talked about
they're all well thought out.
you've got schoolies coming up, so there's always time to make mistakes.
Absolutely. And look, last but certainly not least, if people want to get a hold of you, what is the best way? Because, and we actually didn't touch on it, which is unfortunate. We'll have to have you back on. You are no longer in the classroom. You are running your own consultancy now. So
Yeah,
I'd love to talk more. If you want to give an elevator pitch.
sure. So what I want to do is maximize and build as much capability with AI as possible in schools and especially with teachers so that we can build a better future. And so I can run workshops and work. I'd love to work with schools on an ongoing basis. So it's not just a hire and buy kind of arrangement, but sometimes that's all schools want is a bit of a pitch and a bit of provocation as well. I'm really happy to do that. So people can reach out to me on LinkedIn, of course, and at nextwordnow.com. And email me at matt@nextwordnow.com as well. So basically, if you Google The Next Word, you'll find the book and you'll find my website.
Brilliant. Well, I'll make sure I put all those in the show notes as well, so people have access to them there. But
Thanks so much.
Matthew, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your insights. I want to thank you for sharing just your journey thus far. And I look forward to seeing more of The Next Word and having another conversation again in the future.
Of course, Phil. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the platform and the opportunity.
No, it's definitely my pleasure.
Thanks, mate.
Right. Have a great night. Thank you so much for listening to the Tattoo Teacher Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and found it insightful. If you like what you heard, it would mean so much to me if you could either like, follow, and subscribe to whatever platform you are listening on. The music was by DJ Fruit Salad. Thanks again for listening. Stay cool. Be blessed.